The day my brother decided to humiliate me, he did it with a smile on his face and a room full of witnesses. It was my graduation dinner. My mother had reserved a private room at the restaurant she always chose for celebrations, the kind of place with white tablecloths and candles that dripped onto silver holders. 37 people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my father's former business partners, neighbors who had watched me grow up. My father sat at the head of the table in the dark blue suit he saved for important occasions. I remember thinking he looked tired that evening, more tired than usual. I had just finished my master's degree in civil engineering. 5 years of work, 2 of them while holding down a part-time job because I refused to ask for money I hadn't earned. I was 31 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had built something that was entirely mine. My brother Derek stood up before the dessert came. He tapped his glass with a knife, the way people do at weddings. Everyone turned. He smiled the smile I had known my entire life, the one that looked warm from across the room, but felt like something else entirely when you were standing close to it. "I want to say a few words about my brother," he said. I looked at my father. He was watching Derek with an expression I couldn't read. Derek talked for about 2 minutes. He mentioned my degree. He mentioned the years I had spent studying. He mentioned with a small laugh that I had always been the serious one in the family. And then he paused, the way a performer pauses before the line he has been rehearsing all week. "Of course," he said. "We all know that Nathan has always had to work a little harder than the rest of us. That's just what happens when you're not quite—" He tilted his head. "A natural fit." The room went quiet. "I mean that as a compliment," he added quickly, still smiling. "Some people are just built different. Right, Nathan?" He raised his glass toward me. I did not raise mine. I sat there and I felt something I had felt before. A specific kind of cold that doesn't come from the temperature in the room. It comes from recognition. From realizing that something you suspected for a long time has just been confirmed in front of everyone you know. I said nothing. I picked up my fork and I finished my meal. Around me, the conversation slowly started again. Careful and quiet, the way conversations restart when everyone in the room is pretending they didn't just hear what they heard. My father did not look at Derek for the rest of the evening. I have tried to explain Derek to people who didn't grow up with him, and it's always difficult. He wasn't cruel in the obvious way. He never hit me. He never screamed. He operated in a register just below what most people would call unacceptable, close enough to a joke that he could always pull back, far enough from one that the person he aimed it at felt it land. We were 18 months apart. He was older. From the time I was old enough to understand the dynamics of a room, I understood that Derek was the center of ours. He was charming in the way some people are charming, effortlessly, almost accidentally, as though likability were simply something that happened to him rather than something he worked at. My mother adored him in the specific way some mothers adore their firstborn sons, which is to say, completely, and without the kind of critical distance that might have been good for him. My father was different. My father was a man who paid attention. His name was Raymond. He had started a structural engineering firm in his early 30s and built it into something substantial over the course of 20 years. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He didn't hug easily or say the kinds of things that people write on greeting cards, but he was present. He watched. He remembered. When I was 9 years old and told him I wanted to understand how bridges stayed up, he brought home a textbook from his office and sat with me at the kitchen table for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon while we read through it together. He never made me feel like that was a burden. Derek never noticed moments like that. Or if he did, he filed them away for later. Growing up, I was aware that I didn't look like my brother. I didn't look much like my mother either. I had my father's height, more or less, but the resemblance stopped there in ways I couldn't always articulate. People would look at Derek and then look at me, and sometimes their eyes would shift in a way that asked a question they weren't going to say out loud. I learned to ignore it. Families don't always produce matching sets. That's not unusual. I told myself that for a long time. After the graduation dinner, Derek acted as though nothing had happened. That was always how it worked. The comment existed. The comment also did not exist. If you brought it up, you were being sensitive. If you let it go, it calcified into the foundation of every room you shared with him going forward. I let it go. I went back to my apartment. I accepted a job offer I'd been sitting on for 3 weeks, a position at an infrastructure firm in the city. Good work, honest work, the kind of thing my father would have respected. I told myself that Derek's words at the dinner were just Derek being Derek, which was a sentence I had used so many times it had lost whatever meaning it once had. But something had shifted. I could feel it. 2 months after the dinner, my father called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He asked if I could come by the house that weekend. Just me, he said, not a family thing. He wanted to talk. I said yes. I didn't ask what it was about. With my father, you didn't need to. He would tell you when he was ready, and not before. When I arrived, he was sitting in the study where he always sat on Saturday mornings. The room with the drafting table he never used anymore, and the bookshelves that went floor to ceiling along 2 walls. He looked thinner than he had at the graduation dinner. His color wasn't right. He told me without preamble that he had been diagnosed with a progressive condition 6 months earlier. He had told my mother. He had not told Derek or me because he had wanted to get his thinking straight before he did. He had spent the past 6 months doing exactly that. I sat across from him, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you years ago. I'm not going to apologize for the timing because I made the decision I thought was right, and I still think it was. But you're old enough now, and I'm... He paused. The circumstances have changed. He told me then. He told me that when he and my mother married, she had been in a relationship before him. That the relationship had ended, but that it had not entirely ended cleanly. That she had found out she was pregnant, and that by the time she knew, the man was already gone. Moved, left the city, no clean way to reach him. That she had told Raymond before they married. That Raymond had made a choice with full knowledge of what he was choosing, and that he had never once regretted it. He told me I was that child. I looked at him across the room, and the room felt different than it had 10 minutes before. Derek doesn't know, my father said. Your mother and I decided that together. Whether you tell him and how is something I'm leaving to you. I want you to know that I'm telling you this now because you deserve to know your own history, not because it changes anything between us. Nothing changes between us, Nathan. Nothing ever did. I went home and I sat in my apartment for the rest of that evening, and I did not turn on the television or look at my phone. I just sat there. And I thought about all the times I had watched Derek in a room and felt slightly outside of it. And I thought about all the times my father had sat with me at the kitchen table. And I thought about the fact that he had known the entire time and had chosen every single day to choose me. That meant something. It meant more than I had words for. What I did not anticipate was Derek. I don't know how he found out. I have my theories. My mother, in a moment of vulnerability, might have said something. There might have been documents somewhere, medical records, old paperwork. Derek was the kind of person who looked for information the way some people look for exits, constantly, without announcing it. What I know is that about 6 weeks after my conversation with my father, Derek called me on a Sunday evening. He didn't ease into it. So, he said, I had an interesting conversation with Mom. I didn't respond. She told me something about you, about where you actually come from. A pause. I think we need to talk about what that means for the family. I told him I wasn't going to have that conversation on the phone. He came over 2 days later. He sat on my couch and he looked at me the way he had looked at me at the graduation dinner. That particular arrangement of his features that wasn't quite contempt, but was also not anything else. "The firm," he said. "Dad's firm. I think we need to be honest about the fact that there are certain questions now about whether, given the situation, it makes sense for you to have the same stake in it that we always assumed." I said, "Derek?" "I'm just being practical," he said. "I'm not trying to be unkind. This is a legal and financial question, not a personal one." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Have you talked to the attorney?" He said he was planning to. I told him he should go ahead and do that. What Derek did not know, because my father had not told him, was that Raymond had spent the past several months working with the firm's estate attorney. He had restructured everything. Not in reaction to Derek, or not only in reaction to Derek, but because he was a methodical man who was facing a significant change in his circumstances and who had spent his entire professional life understanding that structures, if you build them right, hold even under pressure. The firm's ownership had been divided. Derek held shares. I held shares. The percentages were not equal, and they were not equal in a specific way that my father had thought through carefully, because he had watched Derek for 31 years, and he understood exactly what Derek would do the moment he thought there was an opening. Derek called the attorney. I know this because the attorney called me afterward, as my father had arranged he would. The attorney told Derek, politely and professionally, that the structure of the estate was set, that the documentation was clear, that biological relationship, while meaningful in many contexts, was not the determining factor in the arrangements Raymond had made, because Raymond had made his arrangements deliberately, in writing, with full legal counsel, while of sound mind. Derek apparently asked if there was any avenue to contest. The attorney told him there was not. Derek called me the evening after that conversation. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 12 seconds long and contained 4 words. "We need to talk." I didn't call back. My father passed 8 months later. It was a Thursday in November, quiet, at home. My mother was there. I was there. Derek arrived about an hour after, and he stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time without saying anything. And I think that whatever he felt in that moment was genuine. Because whatever Derek was, he was Raymond's son in the way that all of us who had lived in that house were Raymond's, which is to say, formed by him, whether we understood that or not. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks later at the attorney's office. It was a formal meeting, the kind with a long table and chairs that don't quite match and a window that looks out onto a parking structure. My mother sat on one side. Derek and I sat on the other. The attorney went through the documents in order. The house, its contents, various accounts, then the firm. Then, when he reached the section on ownership and control, he read it the way attorneys read things, evenly, without inflection, giving each word the same weight so that no single one could be said to have been emphasized. Derek's share of the firm was substantial. There was no question about that. Mine was larger. And the provision my father had included, the one that established how decisions would be made in the event of a disagreement between stakeholders, was written in language so precise that there was, as the attorney had already told Derek, no avenue to contest it. Derek sat very still while the attorney finished reading. I watched him the way he had watched me my whole life, from the side, quietly, taking note. He didn't look at me. He looked at the table, at the window, at the parking structure beyond it. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him, and I could see that he was working very hard to keep his expression neutral. The way people work to keep expressions neutral when they have just understood something they cannot undo. My mother reached over and touched my hand after the attorney finished. She didn't say anything. She just held it for a moment. And I understood that gesture to contain everything she didn't have the language for. The years of silence, the choice she had made, the grief of watching two sons she loved occupy the same room with so much distance between them. I squeezed her hand once and then let go. Outside afterward, Derek stopped me on the sidewalk. The afternoon was cold and flat, the kind of November light that makes everything look slightly more exhausted than it is. "Dad told you," he said. "Not a question." "He told me what he wanted me to know," I said. Derek looked at me. Something moved across his face, not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. The cousin of regret. The feeling you have when you realize that a move you made 3 years ago set in motion a sequence of events you didn't fully calculate. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you," he said. I didn't argue with that. I'm not sure it was entirely true, but I also don't think it was entirely false, and I had stopped needing Derek's actions to be simple enough to fit into a category. "I know," I said. I walked to my car. I sat there for a few minutes before starting it. The street outside was quiet. A delivery truck turned at the corner. A woman walked a dog past the parking meter at the end of the block. I thought about my father at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, a textbook open between us, explaining how a suspension bridge distributes weight, how the tension in the cables transfers to the towers, how the whole structure depends not on any single point being strong enough to bear everything, but on the load being spread in the right way, to the right places, by someone who understood the forces involved. He had spent his whole life building things that would hold. I started the car. I had work to do.